Yes.
All right.
Matter of fact, the last couple of sessions with the Detox Whisperer have been pretty phenomenal, I thought.
All right. Praise Yah.
It's the last one, I just had to listen to it 2 or 3 times. It was so packed full of stuff. So here's Mark Heston, and he's going to continue on where he left off from the last time. And I understand that he has some great new discoveries for us. The Detox Whisperer. What you got, Mark?
Well, sorry, I'm trying to get this little sub window out of my view of you here. It's a webcam central. I guess it's looking for settings. Let's see. Sure. And I'm trying to just close that, and it keeps coming back up. Anyhow, maybe I can just deal with that.
Well, you're looking good.
Yeah, you are too. How was your tabernacles? Pretty good?
It was wonderful.
All right.
Wonderful. Some people really got in there and dug and went to work there to get the place we went to in good shape, and it couldn't have been better, I don't think. Everything went great. It's very devotional. It's strenuous too, but it's very good.
Yeah. When you say strenuous, you guys went on several hikes or something, or you mean just the work that had to be done around the place?
Everything's strenuous for me, but I'm thinking mainly Allison, Gary, and Lee Hayhurst had a lot of work to do to help prepare the place for people to come. And you see, this place is off the grid, so you had generators to deal with and a lot of cleaning to deal with and finding places for people to stay. It's in a mountainous region, and the roads, just getting up there, you've got about 3 or 4 miles of very bad road, taking you right up in the air. And then the roads on the place to the various cottages and houses there, some are just impassable. Some you had to get out and walk quite a way just to get to. But other than that, it was, well, I think that was part of what was neat about it.
Right. The wilderness aspect, yeah. Right. Okay. Well, that's great. All right. Looks like we have someone else coming in, I guess.
Ann's in.
Okay.
Lee's in. Norman Gray. It's looking at the magic mirror today.
And Sherry's in. Okay.
Sherry.
All right.
Is here. Sherry Gamble. Tony Bank, of course. Well, I haven't seen Paula for a while. Good to have you, Paula.
All right. Shall I open up a little prayer, Jackson?
Sure.
Heavenly Father, we just want to ask for your blessing upon us as we enter into elements relevant to the body temple, things that you have appropriated for us according to your word, that we have lost sight of. And Father, we have a body here present with us that are wanting to determine things that are more closely aligned with your ways. And I just pray those things that are presented here in this talk, only those things that are true and proper in your sight that might be retained in our hearts and our minds, that we might, you through giving us strength, might find means to incorporate these. And we ask it now in your Son's name.
Amen.
I think we left off last time talking about how Parkinson's disease and Alzheimer's have been rising about 3 times faster than heart disease just since 1990. That's a 30% increase. And we talked a little bit how the statin drugs, which came in just prior to the 1990s, that along with the SSRI drugs, your selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors of the antidepressants, also came in just before the 1990s, about 1987. Then there was a new generation of a type of antibiotic that is known today as Cipro. It was the most inexpensive antibiotic, also came in 1987. And then the most prescribed antibiotic of all time was introduced at about the same time, called erythromycin, known as Zithromax. Some people might have known it in the hospital use for IVs. It was called Z-Pak. And so with this in mind, with these new class of medications that were just prescribed on a regular basis in a lot of office visits across the country, we consider now, the onset of Parkinson's disease, the beginning of it. Some of the symptoms that come on in the early stages: constipation, depression, anxiety, anosmia, which is the inability to smell properly, and a deficiency of the fourth stage of sleep. And these happen to be all the same side effects of these medications that I just mentioned. The statins, they bring about depression, reduction of the fourth stage of sleep. Cipro, side effect is anosmia, not able to smell very well. Zithromax, anxiety and constipation. So anybody that's taken these drugs, certainly in their fourth and fifth decade of life, are at a high risk for the possibility of developing either Parkinson's or Alzheimer's. Now, those of us that are listening, I'm sure most of us are trying to incline ourselves to more natural means. And I truly believe that Yahweh has the proper remedies, not to just manage a disease, but to literally take care of the problem, get to the root cause of an issue, and solve it. And so consequently, we think about these risk factors. You couple that with, the flu vaccine, and what's required of hospital personnel to get that 3-stage hepatitis B vaccine. Some of these other vaccines that are recommended, that along with some of these medications that I've listed and others, are just putting us at risk. Let's see here. And of course, talk about the baby boomer generation, which really came about the end of the 1950s into the 1960s, with the movement away from breastfeeding, with this new formulas that were available for bottle feeding, greatly inhibited the proper development of the microbiota in the little child in its development, which, believe it or not, over the course of our decades, plays a big role in our health. And then you consider the vaccines that are given to 3-month-old, 6-month-old, 1-year-old kids. We have some 60+ vaccines that are now on the books as recommended for all infants, regardless. Now, granted, there may be some that are more required. There may be additional ones required for those that have additional risks. Some doctors are being a little more adroit about the idea of, looking for risk factors in the infants now, because as we're into the second or third generation from the baby boomers, and we're seeing a reduction in the vitality of children. So some doctors are actually seeing this. They're actually reducing some of this vaccine and trying to allow the child to be a little bit older before they actually induce some of these vaccines. But anyhow, this all got started during that baby boom generation with that idea. You have C-sections, you have bottle feeding. We were just starting to get into this hectic lifestyle at about that time. And also at that same time, in the early 1960s, were the new hybridized forms of some of the gluten grains. And some of these new varieties had a reduced uptake of some of the more critical minerals, zinc, copper, iron, magnesium, selenium. And, as much as what they have mentioned, as much as a 19 to 28% reduction without a reduction in the soil levels. In other words, that much reduction in the grain itself without a compromise of the soil, at least in this extent of the amount of minerals in it. Now, probably with the fact that the less saprophytes and microorganisms, that may be part of the reason why and the hybridization, maybe why the plant wasn't actually taking up enough of these minerals into the fruit. But that was of little consequence to the commercial bread makers who, you know, well, I think all of us had partaken in Wonder Bread, right, back then in the 60s, all those that were kids back then. And that was a negative food. That actually had deleterious effects on us. If it wasn't for the other decent foods that we were still eating at the time, we would have had a lot more problems. Okay, so that kind of wrapped up a little bit from where we left off. So I just want to mention, you know, that the very first directive that Yahweh had given to Adam after his sin was for him to till the ground by the sweat of his own brow. That's in Genesis 3:19. And since every institution that Yahweh gives us is for our own good, and these are the institutions that Yahweh gives us, each of us should cultivate the ground to bring forth something. You know, if we can grow even a tomato plant, something, so that we can at least acknowledge how it is that Yahweh brings about food for us from the ground. Mind you that this is the first directive that he gave us when sin entered this world, and we should really follow through on that. And of course, the food that he designed for us prior to sin, Genesis 1:29, all the seed bearing fruit, the herb bearing seed, and of course many of the hybridized seeds today that don't bring forth fruit, like your seedless foods, those that cannot, if you went ahead and planted those seeds and they don't propagate any fruit, technically those are not the foods that were prescribed in Genesis 1:29. So something to think about when we think about, you know, seedless foods of any kind. So Yahweh had ordained for us to get our hands dirty, to actually literally get into the dirt and sweat a little bit. You know, have a little bit of a garden out there. And you know, everything Yahweh does for us is for our benefit. So it's not just in bringing forth plants for the sake of fruit and food for us to eat, but getting our hands dirty, getting our feet dirty. You know, like I've mentioned before, how getting our bare feet and our hands into the dirt actually has a communication into the ground, into the saprophytes. And those microorganisms pick up the molecules from our palms and from the soles of our feet. And that has an impact on the seeds, ultimately, that we put into the ground that bring forth fruit, which is very, very neat little thing that Yahweh had designed for us, that we didn't really have any concept of. And we're just coming back to some of this knowledge. Now let's consider the post-flood directive of eating animals, right? You know, in fact, just yesterday at our group meeting in our parshat, we were talking about Genesis 9:3. You know, so after the flood, Yahweh had given a food directive to Noah. And that was, I mentioned this a little bit in the part 1, and that is that the entire yokeable, tameable animal is to be food for you. Right? You look at that word, it's kaf lamed, precedes as a prefix, if you will, the word that talks about every creature. And when you put that in preface to that other Hebrew word, now it changes that following word. So we're not talking every animal like a reptile. We're talking about, as one of the alternative definitions is in the Strong's there, but we're talking about a yokeable, tameable animal that is penned in and used for the benefit of plowing. Now, I got this information from Jeff Benner. Many of you probably have some of his material, and I got that aspect of it from him. And then the Strong's for the kaf lamed means the whole or the entire thing. So we're talking about eating the entire animal, the entire kosher animal, and that includes the cartilage, the bones, the ligaments, all the organs. This is what Yahweh had told us we should be eating ever since we stepped off the boat. And we all stepped off the boat through Noah. So anyway, just a little added note on that. And this was brought out in our parshat yesterday, which was kind of news to some of our members there, that it was 7 pairs of clean animals, not just, we think of by sevens, we think it's just 7 animals, 7 of this clean, 7 of that clean. No, it was 7 pairs of clean animals. That means 14, 7 male, 7 female of all the clean animals. And that included the birds. And so there was by sevens or 7 pairs of the clean birds. And then there was 2 male and 2 female of the unclean animals. So when it says by twos, again, it's 2 pair. Anyway, so that was a lot of animals. But still, we have to remember that as it mentions, there's so many kind of animal as opposed to species, right? We have, probably millions of species today. But back then, a lot of the creation scientists have all corroborate on this idea that there was somewhere between 8,000 and 10,000 different kinds of animal back then. And a percentage of that obviously were fish, which didn't need to be taken into the ark. Anyway, so the size of the ark was at 450 cubits by 75 cubits, or maybe it was feet. But anyway, the size of the ark was ample room to take on those animals and their food, so it wasn't a big deal. Okay, let's see. I'm going to go to another point in here. Right, and then so Noah had offered burnt offerings of thanksgiving when he came off the ark of all the clean beasts and all the clean fowl, so that Yahweh could then, and he did this for Yahweh's protection and provision to his chosen steward. Right? So let's see. So Noah, in consideration of the fact that Noah and his sons, technically, they were antediluvians now in a diluvian world, they still lived a lot longer than those that were born from their own lineage after the flood. And a lot of this had to do with their own microbiome. That is the foundation of the flora in their gut. That was such a layered microorganism. Now remember from the talk we had last time, I mentioned how the genetic contents that we have within our body reside more within the microbiota, that's the microorganisms in our gut, than all the cells in our body. We have 10 times more bacteria in our body than we do have cells, and 100 times, actually 100 times more genetic material in the microbiome. All the bacteria in our gut, which would include bacteria that are natural to our lungs, upper respiratory tract, and even some prominent, renowned researchers are now finding that there's good bacteria beyond the blood-brain barrier, which is pretty incredible. And they have their responsibility in and amongst the glial cells of our brain. What happens when you take an antibiotic? My Lord, we're missing out on what's going on in the body. It's not what Yahweh had intended for us to do. Anyway, to get back to this microbiome of the antediluvians, those bacteria were incredibly protected, even though the environment was changed. The lack of oxygen had been reduced, the atmospheric pressure had been reduced, but they still continue to live hundreds of years even after. Noah lived, another 350 years after he stepped off the ark. So, so we think about this genetic element here. Essentially, the genetic potential in our cells only contributes to 1% of the total genetic material in our body, which is pretty amazing. So with that in mind, we need to consider about what we're taking into our body as food. We are truly the temple of Yahweh. in that regard. Yeah, so, and the other thing about this microbiome is the diversity of the bacteria in our gut. Sorry about that. We have probably less than 400 different types of bacteria in our gut, whereas back in Noah's day, they probably had 1,000 to 2,000 different kinds of bacteria that were all good bacteria, the vast majority being good bacteria that contributed to making. Yes, you are. Anyhow, so yeah. Sorry about that. Kind of lost my track here. Yeah. So we again, here we are. You know, if we have less than 400 diversity of bacteria in our gut, and they had close to maybe 2,000. I mean, if you do the math on that, you consider maybe the measure of vitality in our bodies could be related to the diversity of the bacteria and the amount of bacteria. They probably had a lot more bacteria. They were a lot bigger back then. It's been theorized that Noah was probably somewhere in the neighborhood of about 15 feet. But some of you have heard this idea. You know, antediluvians were 12 to 15 feet. I guess the Nephilim were even larger than that. Those were of a mixed genetic potential that was not of Yahweh. But anyhow, the point being is that we need to get our diversity of our gut back to a higher percentage, and of course, good bacteria, have our connection with the ground, get our hands dirty, getting non-hybridized seeds, heirloom varieties, start saving seeds and growing our own, getting back to the land of some capacity, even if it's just a planter box in our back porch if we're in the city or whatever. So we need to do something like that. And let's see. So consequently, you know, if we eat processed foods, which are greatly devoid in trace minerals, and is devoid of some key amino acids, essential fatty acids, and by the way, you never hear the term essential carbohydrates. We always hear essential amino acids, which comprise our proteins, essential fatty acids. But we never hear, because carbohydrates are not essential. You know, we've been taught that, you know, the only thing the brain lives on is glucose, and that is absolutely false. The primary food for the brain and the entire body is actually fat. And maybe I mentioned this in the previous discussion that, you know, this food pyramid that they've been foisting on us, if you take the sugar out of the top of that and you flip that food pyramid upside down, that is the way we're supposed to eat. So with the lack of vitality in the soil today, I think it's imperative for us, and especially if we have taken antibiotics, and I'm talking even if it's been 10 or 12 or 20, 30 years ago, if we've taken antibiotics, that's affected our gut incredibly. And so we need to be taking probiotics, we need to be taking supplementation because of the fact that our land and our soil is not what it should be. We need to be doing this. We need to be supplementing at this point, unless we can fully get our soil back to a parameter that is truly full of microbes, good microbes and saprophytes and all the trace minerals and all that kind of stuff. Otherwise, we should really be supplementing to some degree. So the majority of the good bacteria in our gut are aerobic bacteria, and that basically means they thrive on oxygen. There are a few transient anaerobes that do have a symbiotic relationship with us, which is basically, you know, they're beneficial to us to some degree. And those are the ones that are actually tolerant to oxygen to some degree anyhow. So by adding fermented or cultured vegetables and dairy, you know, if we can find some good organic raw dairy that's not low fat, that's high in fat, and some organic vegetables, and if we can just add, like with the vegetables, we just add some kind of unrefined salt to that, it's very easy to make fermented vegetables. You just shred your vegetables, put it in filtered water, take a measured amount of like Celtic sea salt, any kind of unrefined salt, and not sure what the ratio is, but it's probably somewhere in the neighborhood of about 2 tablespoons of Celtic sea salt is what we use. And we just pack, you know, like a shredded cabbage into a 1-quart jar as much as we can, pack it in there real good. You know, you might want to bruise the leaves pretty good after you shred it, and then put it in the jar, pack it down good, put the water in there. And you can make your saline water ahead. So you put about 2, you know, what I'll do sometimes, I'll put 1 tablespoon of the Celtic sea salt in a quart of water, and then pour it, or not a full quart, but in a, you know, like a cup or so, and pour that into that stuffed jar of cabbage, shredded cabbage, and then put another tablespoon of salt on top of that, and then I'll put a lid on that, and you just leave it on the counter, and just burp the thing about once or twice a day, because it will leak on you. You may want to put it on a plate or put it in a bowl, because it'll effervesce it a little bit, and you'll have some water drainage coming off the top. After about 3 to 5 days of that, boy, you got some awesome sauerkraut, and then you can keep that in the fridge for upwards to several months, like 2 or 3 months or more. Really good means of good bacteria, and that's real high in lactobacillus. Different types of lactobacillus bacteria. And so, and again, other vegetables you could do, they harbor other positive bacteria. And so, you know, fermenting different vegetables here and there is great for diversity. You know, getting kefir grains, or making your own low temperature yogurt, you know, like in a food dehydrator, you can actually you know, titrate the temperature on that, and make your own probiotics with dairy. And we have to remember that our Savior was raised on butter, right? We remember that verse in Isaiah where it talks about he was raised on butter and honey, you know, raw, unfiltered honey, and that butter means that's fat. I mean, that's like 100% grass-fed animal fat, really good for the body, and that's what he subsisted on. So he and his brain, you think about his development as a young child, he was eating fat, animal fat, and his brain developed with that because that's what Yahweh had him to eat. So anyway, we need to walk like he walked, right? Okay. Yes, and so when they made, you know, back in the days of the Israelites, when they made their cultured dairies, you know, they would put that in these little canteens, like these little leather canteens. They were basically the stomach lining of goats or sheep, and they would hang this milk sack over the entrance of their tent. And it would sit there for a few days, right, in the whatever temperature that was. And it was customary for, you know, extended family members that may come by and visit, to or other friends. They would enter the tent, and it was like a special greeting and well-wishing, as they would take that little bag of cultured milk, and they would shake it as they entered the home, you know, as a friendly gesture. Just thought that was kind of an interesting custom back then. Okay, let's see. Yeah, another concept that is not, unfortunately is not taught in medical school, but is taught amongst those that are microbiologists and other scientists who do research on a microscopic level. There's a process called pleomorphism. And pleomorphism basically is where when a virus can, depending on the condition or the environment that the bug is in, that a virus can turn, from a parasitic microbe, which is what a virus is, into a bacteria, and a bacteria can turn into a fungus. That's a process called pleomorphism. And again, scientists, researchers will validate this. It's not taught in medical schools, and so a doctor will probably poo-poo that. So consequently, if we take an antibiotic, what happens to those bacteria in our gut that are supposed to be doing bad things to our body? They're going to revert to fungus. And that's one of the side effects of antibiotics. Well, it turns out that a percentage of those bacteria will actually pleomorph into fungus to survive the new environment made up by those chemicals brought in by the antibiotic. So we need to find more natural remedies to take care of our infections. And Yahweh's given those to us. He's told us about the different herbs, etc. Okay. And let's see. I'm just looking at a few of my notes here. Right. Right. Okay. Yeah. So here's a good point. The many of the bacteria that we have in our gut, the good bacteria, actually contribute to the endocrine organs in our bodies making hormones. So essentially, if we have a good diversity of bacteria in our gut, those bacteria make what would be called pre-hormones for the different endocrines within our body. When we think about hormonal dysfunction, which is rampant all over the place, it's partly due to lack of nutrients, a dysbiome, in other words, a disproportionate of bad bugs to good bugs and lack of diversity, etc. And it's partly due to the fact that we don't have the good bacteria making these pre-hormones for the pancreas, for the adrenals, for the thyroid, etc. And I don't believe I had talked about this last time, but yeah, this idea of epigenetics. And this would play into this problem regarding GMOs. The fact that the bacteria actually are responsible for flipping switches on and off in the genetic makeup of our own cells. And this is where some of this pre-hormone chemical comes into play. We absorb these pre-hormones into our blood. They go to all different parts of our body, and they affect potentially all the cells of our body. And so this epigenetic thing, this turning on of switches and turning off of others, I mean, we're talking, this has got an incredible parallel to how a computer works and all the switching and channeling that goes on in the microcurrents of a CPU. Same kind of thing with the epigenetics. And so the GMOs are causing our bacteria in our gut to switch certain genetics off and switch other ones on. I don't know if I mentioned this in the last talk, but a lot of the GMO foods, have this Roundup Ready genetic material, right? It's called glyphosate. That's the active ingredient of Roundup. And so we have these same bacteria, the genetic makeup of the GMO foods that we eat. We take in that food, the genetic makeup of the food gets translated to the bacteria. Now that bacteria has taken on the genetic material now those same bacteria can now make minute levels of glyphosate. And so we have these minute microscopic factories of Roundup in our gut as we eat GMO food. So something to consider. So as much as we can, we need to at least look for foods with, labeling that says non-GMO project. That doesn't guarantee it's non-GMO, but the glyphosate index is going to be much lower in that kind of food. And so you can see, especially now, Yahweh is imploring us, please, take my seeds, the good seeds, and start planting some. Start learning how to grow your own food. At least get a percentage of your food from my ground. The other thing about the microbiome, that gets kick-started when we are born. Whatever the microbiome of the mother's vagina is, has a big play in the child, because as the child comes through the vaginal canal, I think I may have talked about this a little bit in the other, not sure. But as the child, especially coming face first through the vaginary canal, it's picking up all the good and bad bugs of the mother into the eyes, the nose, the ears, and this begins the process of microorganism development in the newborn, is what the mother has with a vaginal delivery. So you can see how a C-section baby loses that potential. And especially if you take a C-section baby that is bottle fed instead of breastfed, even less bacteria. And so those kids are going to be much more prone to problems with vaccines, needs for antibiotic because of the lack of immune system they have, and getting sick all the time. It's kind of sad that that this has happened. Yeah, because we have a near epidemic of conditions amongst the children population in this country of autism spectrum, where there's a and different parts of the country have it worse than others. I would say it's of epidemic proportions in certain parts of the Midwest, and this has a play into the third and fourth generation of us using antibiotics and vaccines. And the vaccine is not really the cause of the problem. It's pulling the trigger of the gun that causes this autism, because we've been set up. We've got such a low diversity. We got such a low amount of good bacteria in our gut that, you just one shot after another on a kid, he's eventually going to fall somewhere in the autism spectrum, which on the low end is ADD and ADHD, right? Attention deficit disorder, attention deficit hyperactive disorder, which is a real problem. This is a major problem, and those disorders have a play into that cultural process that we've been part of now for about 2 or 3 generations now, or more. So when a child is born, he has this oily, almost cheese-like substance covering on his skin. It's called a vernix. And you have a vernix with that very fine hair on the skin, which is called lanugo. Those two work together to lubricate this neonate as he comes through the vaginal canal and to take on those bacteria that the mom has. And so what's interesting is these are fat molecules, and so he's picking up bacteria that love fat. We want good bacteria that love fat. I mean, even from the entering into this environment as a newborn, we're coming into fat. Kind of funny. And so even his skin is covered with this vernix, and this actually lubricates him as he comes through the vaginal canal. but it has this second purpose of creating a bacterial potential for the body, for the orifices of the body, and even affecting chemicals on the skin, so the baby absorbs the chemicals from the bacteria through the skin. And it takes about 6 to 7 months for a baby to establish a strong, disease-resistant, health-promoting gut flora, even vag delivery, breastfed. They need about that 6 to 7 months. In fact, a baby does not make amylase with his saliva glands until about that time, until those teeth start budding. That's about the only. That's when amylase, which starts coming in with the in the salivary glands. Now think about what amylase is to break down carbohydrates. Now, if a child doesn't have hardly any amylase coming into his body for the first 6 months of life, what does that tell you about his carb intake? Virtually zero. And so the food that he's taken in from his mother has the enzymes that he needs, has the fat, and a lot of it is fat. There are some carbs there, and the colostrum. The colostrum in the beginning stages of breastfeeding really helps to establish that microbiota for a little baby.
Just a question.
Sure.
The amylase.
Yeah.
My information might be pretty old, but am I correct in thinking that one of the things that causes neural snarling or gnarling in Alzheimer's disease is an overabundance of amyloid?
Yeah, and some of that is, because we've been missing some of the essential fatty acids that we need for all the cells in our body, and in order for a cell to divide properly, it needs that. You think about all the cells have a fatty acid membrane, and the membrane is the brain of the cell. It's not the nucleus in the center of it like we used to think. All the thinking aspects of a brain are on the outside, and that is a fatty layer that allows all these different receptor molecules on that, and that determines whether I'm going to take something in or let something out. And so because our diet has been so low in fat, percentage-wise, we take in typically in the neighborhoods of like 60 to 80% carbohydrate, which is incredible. And we've been put on via this food pyramid, a low-fat diet. Then you put a patient who's already eating like this on a low-fat diet on top of that. This is part of the reason why the brain looks like a crenated raisin. It starts shrinking. The ventricles in the middle of the brain, those cavities that hold the cerebral spinal fluid, get larger. Well, it's the fat content of the brain is going down. And if you want to repair, and you can literally repair that. And I can appreciate the science behind this that I've been studying. And so consequently, when I hear someone like Joel Wallach, who, and some of you may be familiar with that particular name, Dead Doctors Don't Lie guy, he'll tell you you can reverse Alzheimer's disease if you catch it before it gets to a more severe stage. You can catch it even in the moderate stages. And he says you have that person eat 25 eggs a day for several, probably months, he says. 25 eggs a day. You're talking about 24 eggs a day, and any other kind of cholesterol, fat, ideally 100% grass-fed animal fat would be some great means of therapy with someone with Alzheimer's disease or any kind of form of dementia to rebuild that. You always put it within our body to rebuild it. We don't have to manage disease. We can actually take care of the problem. Anyway, so now in more severe cases where with a lot of fibrous tissue that's developed with amyloids, you take some of this fat with systemic proteases. These are proteolytic, that's the word, proteolytic enzymes. And you can reverse this even from moderate stage. So so yeah, let's see.
That's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
20 eggs a day for months.
Yeah, yeah. Can you imagine? Now he says you want you want to do it parboiled, so it's not cooked to death. See, the more we cook protein, the more denatured it is, the more difficult it is to digest it, the more likelihood you may have to reside or rely on, other enzymes to help break it down. What I do, as of late, I haven't been eating as much eggs as I probably should, but in the past, I would take several eggs and put them in unreconstituted grape juice. There's something in the grape juice besides resveratrol, when it's not been reconstituted, that can take care of any kind of negative bacteria that might reside with eggs. The fear of eating raw eggs is typically salmonella. I will say that the risk of salmonella with a truly organic egg is almost zero. It's because of the antibiotic and the commercial feed that's fed these chickens that causes the likelihood of salmonella to be a problem. So just think of the good bacteria that's part of a healthy chicken. You're taking that with the egg. You put that in this grape juice, you're going to get the benefit of the good bacteria with that. And so in that protein in there, your body doesn't have to come up with quite so many enzymes to break that down. So, making a purple Julius. I don't know if you guys remember Orange Julius years ago. It used to be a franchise juice places in the malls throughout the country back in the 80s, I think. So we would make these purple Juliuses here at home, just putting several eggs in grape juice. And man, I tell you, that's a great tonic for the blood and just builds up the fat resources within your body. It's a great thing to do periodically. So we shouldn't be concerned about this idea, cholesterol. I think I might have talked a little bit about this on the first session. What is it? They say anything over 200 milligrams per deciliter of cholesterol in your blood, you're at risk for, various different cholesterol-related diseases, which would include heart disease and things like that. And that's really bogus, because what they found is that whether your cholesterol is at 200 or 300, your risk for heart disease or any vascular disease is the same. Cholesterol is an antioxidant. So what are we doing reducing cholesterol with statin drugs because if cholesterol is an antioxidant and we artificially reduce that, what are we doing? We are subjecting our body to all those extra free radicals. And for an older person, that spells disease problems. It spells various chronic disease potential and even the C word, cancer.
Are you saying to quit statins altogether, or substitute them with something?
Well, I've only had, of all the patients that have been on statins that I've tested, I've only had one person test well for a statin. In other words, I determine, some of their nutritional needs. Once we find that out, then I put different medications on them. Now, I can't tell them what to do. I'm not prescribing anything. I'll just show them and say, now look at this. This medication actually is not testing well on you. I will say that depending on the nutrition status of the body, some medications do test well on people depending on where they are in their chronic disease process. And over the course of time, as they stick to a diet regimen and the proper nutritional supplementation protocol that's specific for them, eventually they could get off many of the medications, but that's not my place. I tell them, you have to work with your medical doctor on this. Go back to him and get reevaluated and determine, whether you need to continue with that or not. So yeah, we should be eating about 70 to 75% fat, which again is a flipping of that food pyramid. And so what I'll tell people, in the beginning, because, this is such a culturally ingrained habit, the way that we've been eating, the way that we were raised on how to eat. It takes a while and a little bit of effort to make some of those changes. So I just tell people, just make note of your high carb foods, begin to reduce some of the portions of that, and just start taking, 1 or 2 tablespoons of coconut oil with each meal, and you can start increasing your fat content in your body. And what that'll do, it'll automatically balance out your HDL versus your LDL cholesterol. In other words, your good cholesterol versus your bad cholesterol. People that have concern, because their LDLs are so low, I'll tell you, you eat decent fat, your LDLs will come up where they're supposed to be.
Well, that's my problem. LDLs are way smaller in ratio than they should be.
Yeah, because you see, Jackson, if you ate 100% grass-fed animal products, in other words, the fat in that, they say the fat of 100% grass-fed animal has 6 times the omega-3s, 6 times. And see, this is where part of our problem is. See, the 2 essential fatty acids are omega-6 and omega-3. And there's all sorts of different kinds of omega-3. There's different kinds of omega-6. Well, actually, grass-fed animals, 100% grass-fed animals, the fat that they have a broad spectrum of various different kinds of omega-3s that our body needs. These animals have 3 and 4 stomachs to take care of the greens that we don't have the stomachs to do it. So that's why we have to eat them and eat their fat. That's why Yahweh told us since we came off the boat. I want you to eat this stuff. I want you to eat the entire animal. You got a liver problem? Eat some liver. You got a stomach problem or intestinal problem? Make sausage out of a kosher animal. You got, think about the fat content of the brain. There's nothing wrong with eating a brain. You get an organically grass-fed animal. You can eat that. What do they call that? Sweetbread. Now, I will say I've never done that before. I'd like to be able to do that. I haven't had access to it. But anyway, I've been eating many of the other organs, but and this is all for the benefit of our body temple. You think about the physical makeup of our body and how that has an intimate relationship with the spiritual aspect in our communication with our Father. So let's burn ketones, which have virtually no metabolites, as opposed to glucose, which has several metabolites, many of which the body has to eliminate, has to break down, and can build up in the body and contribute to toxins and all that. So saturated fat is not bad. And let's see. And so, so I just want to reiterate here a little bit.
Try to convince vegetarians of that.
Oh, I know. Well,
2 this week. One was kind. The other one just absolutely exploded at me when I started talking about the fats thing.
Oh yeah. Well, what's interesting? I came out of Adventism. I was a vegetarian for many, many years, and I used to think the same thing that some of my friends, they still adhere to this. But I tell them, I say, listen, the vegetarian diet, back in Genesis 1:29, that was given to us prior to sin. That was given to us prior to the flood. But remember, Yahweh gave us another directive after this flood. Because of man's continual unrepentant sin, this is why we have to eat this stuff. This is why our environment is so screwed up. But when he makes everything new again, I believe he's going to create that firmament canopy again. I believe everything's going to be like it was from the very beginning. And Revelation tells us we're going to be eating 12 different kinds of fruit, a fruit for each month. I mean, that's vegetarian fare. Doesn't say anything about animals there. You know, I don't know if we're going to be eating animals on that side, but he's certainly bringing us back to fruit when that earth is made new again. And so I would suspect that we're going to be back to a vegetarian fare because there's not going to be any death. If there's not going to be any death, that would include the animals. And so I would think anyway. And so yeah, then we're going to go back to the herb-bearing seed and the fruit-bearing trees and all that. So anyhow, and it's all because of man's unrepentant, continual sin. You know, back prior to the time of Moses. That's what kicked us into this present environment. And I just want to mention, you know, this idea about unclean animals. You know, they were called unclean basically because their lack of worthiness as food. They were not untouchables prior to the flood. It was only after the flood, certainly in the time of Moses, where they talked about, you know, not touching the pig and all that. And basically that was because they didn't have soap. They didn't have access to water freely as we do today. And so, yeah, so you can get contaminated with some stuff that way.
Our time is slipping away, but okay. I want to mention to you that there are a lot of good comments on the chat. Maybe look at that before we go.
Oh, right here?
See if we have any questions.
Oh, okay. Oh, cool. Okay, so you want me to go through some of these, Jackson, or
if you'd like, sure.
Let's see. Okay, let's see. Paula says, yeah, I don't eat any processed food, all fresh. I can't get organic that I trust, although friends raise their own meat. Still don't know how truly organic it is. Well, I'll tell you, if you can, I mean, you can ask your neighbors, you know, if they're grass feeding their animal. I know some farmers will finish off their animal before they slaughter them. They'll feed them grain for a period of time, which does affect the fat to some degree. But you can find there's more and more 100% organic. I'm sorry, 100% grass-fed animal that you can find. I've found grass-fed meat in the grocery stores and in these nationally recognized grocery chains are carrying some grass-fed meats now. But yeah, where we can't find it, even if it has some grass-fed, you're going to get some benefit from that. I will say that the the ideal food, just from analysis of the book of Leviticus, that the ideal food to the Hebrew was lamb, kid, and calf fat and meat. And I'm sure they ate the organs too. Okay, let's see. Norman Gray says, okay, I just gone through a rough bout of, I probably shouldn't mention names. Okay, sorry, Norman.
We can all see it, so it's okay.
Oh, is that right? Oh, okay. Okay, so Norman's been dealing with some IBS, went to a naturopath, put me on a strict diet, protein, greens, yeah, nasty tasting herbs. Oh, herb meds. Okay. Much better now. Still working on it. Okay, good deal. All right. One of the things with irritable bowel syndrome, you need to get your ileocecal valve closed. And maybe with the diet over the course of time, it's eventually going to close itself. And that's where the small intestine comes into the large. Many times where the food, the effluent from the small intestine, as it comes into the large intestine, the large intestine will dilate because there's components of the food that are not adequate, and the colon cannot receive it, and the peristalsis is not strong enough because of that fact. There's not enough fiber in it to give it bulk and different things that the cecum needs for that, because that's the strongest part of that. And so many times when that dilates, guess what? The valve that connects to the small intestine cannot close. When you dilate a cavity, then the sphincter related to it also dilates. And so now we got bacteria from the colon going up into the small intestine. That's where the problem comes from. And so eating a better diet slowly over time is going to reduce the size of that sphincter and eventually get that to close off properly and reduce the symptoms. So there's actually a technique where you can go in and close that and reduce your symptoms, fairly quickly, and then doing what you're doing, changing the diet. So I'm glad to hear that you're 95% doing a lot better. That's, yeah, rough to start, yeah. Okay, let's see. Now, okay, someone's saying here that Torah forbids. Now, I know that when an animal has been, when you actually commit your sins over the head of the animal, it's forbidden for anybody who has just placed their sins on the animal to eat that animal. That's for the priest. Now, the priest, they're told to actually eat the fat in the holy place. That would include the fat over the kidneys, over the lower liver. So forbidding the use of an Israelite to eat anything of kidneys and liver, I'd like to actually see the verse on that, because we have to read it in its context, recognizing that there's sacrificial animals dedicated, and then there's other animals that were for food. And again, considering the fact, Genesis 9:3 says the entire yokable, tameable animal shall be food for you. Let's see. Any recommendations for upper respiratory health? Well, I'll tell you, there's a lot of, and especially for us that spend a lot of time outside, I don't know if you're privy to chemtrails, but that's a real thing. Those are those funny stripes in the sky that we've been seeing that make these wispy, crazy-looking sci-fi clouds these days. There's nano-aluminum and barium that comes down out of the sky, and that stuff gets into our lungs. And and so, doing bentonite clay periodically, making sure, taking some decent probiotics will help the respiratory also, and just making sure you get a decent multivitamin mineral. I will recommend Garden of Life. That company was started by Jordan Rubin, who is obviously from the tribe of Reuben. He has a very interesting background and the sickness that he came out of. In fact, he had sold the company now to an MD who has basically been showing good colors. He's written several books on some of these very same things we're talking about here. That's David Perlmutter. He's right there in Jupiter, Florida there, Jackson. He's got a good clinic. He's got a lot of good books, a lot of good information. He's got several YouTubes. I'd recommend viewing any of his stuff and reading some of Jordan Rubin's books, and look for the Garden Life products there. In some of they have these, what do they call it? Primal. Anyway, he's the one that started this HSO movement, and that's the human soil organisms that we've been missing. And he's actually encapsulated these into probiotics so that we can get back to what we were supposed to be like, right? So we can have foundational material to build the diversity that we should be having. So anyway, something to look into, Garden of Life. Let's see. About 3 years ago, I was diagnosed with dementia by the VA. Could have well been misdiagnosed, but I began eating coconut oil. Okay, very good. With coffee, oats, etc. I'm doing better. I don't know if that was the solution, but I don't stop. That's good. And I would say cacao butter is another good fat, another good saturated fat, and it's delicious. Part of the reason why we have a tendency to eat a lot when we're on a high-carb diet is because carbs do not satiate. Only fat satiates. Many times we're eating carbs, we're looking for more carbs because we're thinking we're going to get what we need. And so we just, we stuff ourselves. If we eat fat, we're going to find that we can push ourselves away from the table so much easier. Because now, we got what our body needed from the beginning. It's kind of strange. Okay, let's see. Okay, so he says he takes statins for cholesterol, concerned about statin prescribed by the doctor. Yeah, so anyway, so talk to your doctor about that. I will tell you, you can go to Weston A. Price Foundation. I think it's westonapricefoundation.org. And you can download an article or two on this problem, this issue, this misconception about cholesterol, and bring that article to your doctor and have him read it. And then, and see what he has to say about it. If he's really doing you justice, he'll take the time to read that article. Okay, let's see. Tincture of Ma Huang that I make and sell. Okay. Oh, this is you. Okay, for respiratory and weight loss. And the kratom. Yeah, I'm going to do that, Jackson. I'm going to study a little bit more on that kratom. I'm going to look into that. I have some from it. I've used it a little bit. I want to actually try mixing that with some of the moringa that I have. Okay. Jordan's products are excellent if pricey. Yeah, so I'm sorry. Yeah, Garden of Life is what it was. That was the name of the company. Let's see. Yeah. So no, let's not go with any kind of age limit to tell you when you should start taking medications. And so so when it comes to butter, I want to tell you, 90% of toxins are fat soluble, and so consequently, if we're going to do butter, obviously there's a lot of fat there. You want as much as you can to get organic. If you can find 100% grass-fed butter, then you got creme de la creme right there. That's the food of choice, man. So don't restrict yourselves on butter intake. Yeah, but and now I'm not much of a coffee guy, but there's a lot of cafes now that are offering grass-fed butter for their coffee, which is kind of cool. Okay, okay. So I'm just looking to see if there's any more chats here. So what do you think, Jackson? Should we wind it up, or are we okay, or what do you want to do? I'm sorry, I can't.
Can't have too much of a good thing, though. Maybe we can do this again. We had a good crowd here, very interested people.
Okay. Well,
you went into what I was really wanting to know this time about the fats, because I have two people that are adamantly against what you're saying, to the point of anger, even hissy fit about it. So I'm going to pass this on and get in more trouble. Thank you, Mark.
Okay, sure, you're welcome.
Thank you all for coming on.
Thank you, everybody.
Appreciate it, and see you soon. Y'all be with you.
Bye-bye.